For those of you who haven't yet seen Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, I don't think I can really recommend that you go see it. Disney has been beating this dead horse ever since they bought it, and I don't think their business model should be encouraged. However, if you want to form your own opinions about the movie before they become tainted by my own, then maybe watch it? But how about you pirate it instead of paying for tickets? Or wait 2 years until your uncle buys it on DVD and then watch it at your grandma's house? Or better yet, just take a moment and think to yourself, do I really care about Star Wars? Do I need to watch it? No, I don't. Star Wars is a sad husk of its former self, forever deranged by a generation of inept storytellers. I've long felt that the opening paragraphs of Star Wars movies are cheap tricks disguised as a unique, nostalgic feature in order to get away with putting in as little actual exposition as possible. But in this movie, more than most, there were some things that needed more of an explanation than they ever got. The biggest one was the return of Emperor Palpatine. The opening words tell you he's back. The dead speak. And then you're basically supposed to accept it without questioning why or how, or is this forced and awkward storytelling? It's almost as if Disney intended the trailer for this movie to be this movie's own setup for Palpatine's return. Without there actually being any setup. Just to get the audience to accept it months before the movie released so that it wouldn't feel random. But despite my knowing that Palpatine is in this movie, it still felt completely out of the blue and unexplained. It was one point of many throughout the movie where I could feel the presence of the writers. Incompetent writers, no less. The only explanation for how Palpatine is back was him saying, "I have special Sith power." And we all know the explanation for why Palpatine is back. Like any great franchise, Star Wars needed to reintroduce every character the audience ever liked and retroactively destroy any meaning the previous movies might have had. You thought Darth Vader turning against Palpatine to save his son in Return of the Jedi was a cinematic masterpiece of a moment? Disney didn't. What better way to honor the Star Wars legacy than by undercutting all their previous storylines? Palpatine's demise doesn't mean much when it's not actually his demise, now does it? Also, like any great franchise, Star Wars needed to make it seem like this conclusion had been planned from the very beginning, that they didn't just make this shit up as they went along. And it's completely obvious that they did. Not only is Palpatine back, but he's been behind everything that's ever happened, pulling the strings from the shadows, as Leia put it. The word that I feel best describes this movie, especially in the beginning, is contrived. Obviously, from a completely literal definition, all fiction is contrived. A group of people made it up. So, to clarify, that's not what I mean by contrived. I mean that this entire plotline felt inorganic, unrealistic, artificial, forced, and plastered on. Rather than taking the character motivations and building the story from there, they thought of one or two cool things and forced their way to those moments. In the case of Palpatine, there was no build-up whatsoever. And for everything else, there was no explanation or regard for the repercussions these things would have on the rest of the series. Take Rey's spontaneous ability to heal as an example. They obviously thought it would make a satisfying climactic moment when she used it on Kylo Ren, and then later he used it on her. Which it did, and I'm glad they at least set the end result up a bit by showing this happen a few times throughout the movie. But did they forget the entire reason Anakin turned into Darth Vader? The existence of the entire prequel trilogy? Anakin knows that Padme won't live through childbirth unless he can do something. Palpatine tells him that there's a possibility that Sith powers can save her. But now it turns out that Jedi powers that Rey just randomly realized she could do could have saved Padme. If only The Revenge of the Sith was directed by J.J. Abrams, Padme would have been saved and all this disaster ever since would have been averted. Another example of this, and just like Rey's healing, another spontaneous new thing that I guess can happen in the Star Wars universe, is light speed skipping. Poe can just do this thing that we've never seen done before. Finn has a few lines about it, but the lines are there to set up Poe's random, shady backstory, because I guess 3 movies in they realized he never had much character development. What I'm more concerned with is just the existence of light speed skipping at all. Not only can Poe do it, who is supposed to be a pretty amazing pilot, so whatever, but so can random TIE fighter pilots that are chasing him. He just decides to be the first person in 11 movies to ever use this really helpful ability that would have come in handy in every previous movie. And then all the pilots chasing after him see this and decide to just do it too. All very successfully, no less. Which then raises the question, how did the TIE fighters even follow him? Do they have the light speed tracking technology that was the focus of The Last Jedi? Does every First Order ship have it now? Because if so, how do the rebels have anywhere to hide at all? Which brings me onto a tangent. How is there a rebel base? At the end of the last movie, there were like 20 people. Now, this movie starts and there's a fully functioning rebel base again, nicely set up on some jungle planet. It's not as bad as the magical repopulation of the Dothraki in Game of Thrones, but it still is questionable. It's basically like the second movie never happened. And judging from the immediate repair of Kylo Ren's helmet, Rose getting left out for nearly the whole movie, and Kylo being like, "Hey, remember that time I said your parents are no one? Well, I was just fooling." That was only technically true, but totally not true at all. J.J. Abrams clearly would like the second movie to never have happened. But back to these cool moments the writers were aiming for, we arrive at my first piece of positivity, because one of these moments was sufficiently set up, though it still does require giving the movie some leeway. And this is the forced teleportation of objects between Rey and Kylo. The thing that we have to just give to the movie is to say, yeah, maybe this isn't a thing that can happen between any two Jedi, but because you two are part of a dyad and the Force, whatever that means, and however last-minute logic that sounds, this is a thing you can do. But they did set up in The Last Jedi that there's a special connection between Rey and Kylo, and they can have long-distance vision conversations. And even physical objects, like water, can be transferred between them. Then this movie, they push that further with sand, then with the necklace Rey is wearing, and then Rey transferring a lightsaber to Kylo. In fact, I would have much preferred if this force healing Rey does was a thing she could only do with Kylo because of their force dyad, and not with just anything, making it a unique power rather than seemingly a common Jedi power. Remember how I mentioned that basically every character shows up? It's not just Palpatine, but also Lando Calrissian. We all knew that one was coming from the trailer, and what a sad, unfitting addition he made. He's been hanging out on a desert planet for 15 years, really just doing nothing, apparently. Seriously, why was he there? Rey and company went because I guess Luke and Lando couldn't be bothered to keep looking for Exegol whenever they did that. And what, has Lando just been there ever since? They obviously just wanted to reintroduce him, but couldn't find a single intelligent writer to pull it off. It would have been much better for him to not show up until that moment at the end of the movie when thousands of random ships show up to fight on Exegol. Then instead of Lando weirdly standing still for 15 years, the story would be he was doing whatever out in space, avoiding the First Order, and when he heard the distress signal, he came to save the day. Or better yet, don't put Lando back in the movie. Say he died young or something. But it doesn't stop there. Luke Skywalker makes a comeback as a Force ghost, which was okay, I guess. Of course, Leia, Chewbacca, C-3PO, and R2-D2 are in it, and Han Solo makes a comeback as some strange memory. They always do this in TV shows and movies. Main characters hallucinate people all the time. If you interact with hallucinations of your dead father, you are insane. Is every protagonist in movies literally insane? I guess so. But that's not really the bad part. That's just my personal dislike of that overused entertainment industry gimmick. The bad part is, they redid the scene from The Force Awakens when Kylo Ren kills Han Solo, except he throws his lightsaber away instead of killing him. Why? They unnecessarily rehash an older scene for a cheap injection of meaning. It bothers me. It reminds me of Season 8 of Game of Thrones. Approximately 30 times did they make a direct reference to a Season 1 scene to artificially give you the feeling that this story is coming together to play on your nostalgia, or that there's some sort of story symmetry. You can have story symmetry if you want to, but when it's forced and when you didn't plan it from the beginning, it's usually bad. And Han Solo wasn't the only time they did this in the movie. I noticed numerous shots that were obviously supposed to evoke shots from the original trilogy. The one that comes to mind most is the closing shot of the double-setting sun on Tatooine, or showing a quick shot of Ewoks. It's reusing unearned scenes and characters to manipulate your nostalgia. Bring back Han and Luke and Palpatine and Lando. Why? Because the people love that stuff. They'll pay big bucks to see Lando again. Is it pandering? Is it unoriginal? So what? What was Palpatine's plan anyway? First, he wanted Rey dead, and he'd give supreme power to Kylo for it. Who knows why? Then he wanted Rey to kill him and pledge herself to the dark side, because apparently all previous Sith live on in the current one, so he'd live forever and control her. Then he found out Rey and Kylo are special, so he wanted to kill them both and absorb their power, because that's yet another thing you can just do, I guess. You might say that he's got a plan for everything, backup plans on top of backup plans, but these plans are really inconsistent with each other. What does he want? And what does he expect will happen? If he wants to control the universe, he doesn't get that with option A. And for reasons I'll go into in a second, he also doesn't really get that with option B. Maybe he just wants to secure the strength of the Sith? But is that really Palpatine's way? That seems pretty selfless for him to come back to life, move to the most inconvenient planet in the galaxy, build a couple thousand upgraded Star Destroyers, and then just die to bolster the cause he believes in? Which is already the winning side, which, without his incredibly stupid interference, probably would have won just fine. But the best part of the movie, Kylo Ren's redemption arc, shows that you can renounce your Sith ways. If Rey would have killed Palpatine, there is no guarantee whatsoever that she would have been or remained evil. Kylo Ren has personally slaughtered entire populations, yet he was able to turn away from the dark side. So, really, the only option that would actually work in Palpatine's favor was the one he thought of at the last second. Don't you just love when some dark, evil, supposedly intelligent force has been preparing for years in the background, only to have the shittiest possible plan? He couldn't have, not randomly broadcast his voice to the entire universe, and then, using his massive and improbable fleet, defeated or converted the rest of the galaxy by surprise? Perhaps his broadcast was a mistake. While having a stroke, he accidentally pressed the "Tell the universe I exist" button, and the rest of the plot was him just playing it by ear. Something that actually had me feeling like this movie is a little bit fucked up was how much killing the group of protagonists did, and how they didn't care at all that they were killing people, and in fact on a few occasions gave shouts of glee when they killed people. Especially considering that one of the main characters used to be one of these stormtroopers, who they are so indiscriminately, nonchalantly killing. You would expect Finn to not want to kill stormtroopers, and to be sad when he's forced to do it. Protagonists kill the enemies in most movies, sure, but something about this movie turned that from normal into perverse. And I don't think it was intentional on the movie's part. This feeling crystallizes during the sequence where they rescue Chewbacca from the Star Destroyer. They go in there and kill everybody in their path without hesitation. But when they get outnumbered, the stormtroopers don't kill them immediately. Apparently, they're more civilized. They have to be taken to a different room to be killed. Of course, this is an example of an absurd level of plot armor, but it also makes the bad guys seem better than the good guys. In fact, this movie kind of makes the dark side look good, at least through Kylo Ren, not so much through Palpatine. But the whole movie, Rey is the aggressor, and Kylo is just trying to calm her down. He's the one being reasonable. He's being very open, patient, and understanding, and Rey is trying to kill him. The good guys kill without question and take no prisoners. The bad guys always take prisoners and never shoot to kill, and stormtroopers end up in piles in the hallway, as always. What's the point of Stormtrooper Armor? It's a thought I have in every Star Wars movie because all it takes is one shot from a protagonist's blaster to kill them, but in this movie that thought was even more present. Presumably, their armor was designed to deflect blasters, except it doesn't do that. In fact, they even put in the effort to show you the blaster burns on Stormtrooper armor in this movie. So, what does it do? I suspect all it does is look cool. I said contrived before. Forced. All the extremely quick cuts in the beginning. So much effort to get a plot into the air that just doesn't want to go. Nowhere in the movie did it feel as forced and unnatural as the blatant reminders that Rey has no last name. Hey, just in case you forgot, Rey is no one. It'll be important in this movie. These lines asking Rey about her parents to remind us that she doesn't have a last name, so at the end of the movie she can call herself a Skywalker, and so that one of the main elements of the movie can be the mystery of Rey's identity, which the writers finally thought of an answer for, and want to make it feel like it's a natural part of the story that they aren't just shoehorning in. It's terrible. It's so clear that some writer thought, we need Rey to say, I don't have a family name, so that at the end of the movie she can say, I'm Rey Skywalker. And since we're chucking Palpatine into this thing, let's just make her Palpatine's granddaughter. Nobody will expect that. Let's talk about that plot. My secondary word to describe this movie was convoluted, and this plot was nothing but that. And once again, I don't quite mean the dictionary definition of the word, complex and difficult to follow. I mean the negative connotation of the word, made more complex than it needed to be in an effort to deceive the viewer, to make it seem as if there's more story here than there actually is. This is something bad TV shows do, or video games. Think of Pretty Little Liars. Every episode there's some new development that the show makes out to be really important, and the characters can sidetrack from the actual plot for 45 minutes. And then when you look at the thing as a whole, you realize none of those developments actually meant anything, and it was all just filler. In the first few minutes, the characters learn from a First Order spy that Palpatine is back. And that's no good, so they've got to go kill him. He's on the Sith planet Exegol, which, luckily enough for the plot, is in the unknown regions. Apparently Luke was looking for Exegol, and Rey remembers from his books that there are Sith wayfinders to get there. They have to go to a planet called Basana to pick up where Luke left off. Then they have to find some guy named Ochi who knows where the Wayfinder is. They find a dagger with the Sith language on it, because I guess that's a thing. C-3PO can read Sith, but luckily for the plot, Anakin built C-3PO up to code, and it's illegal for droids to interpret Sith, even though they're rebels and don't really follow galactic laws. So then they plan on finding someone who can read Sith, but Chewbacca and the dagger get captured. They think Chewbacca's dead at first, so they go to Kijimi, where Poe's backstory lives, to crack open C-3PO's brain, a process that will wipe C-3PO's memory. They learn that the Wayfinder is on Kef Bir. They learn Chewbacca's not dead, so they go rescue him, and they also get the dagger back, making C-3PO's brain wipe completely unnecessary. That spy I mentioned before turns out to be General Hux. They go to Kef Bir and learn that the dagger is in the shape of the ruined Death Star and points out the location of the Wayfinder, because that makes sense. Kylo Ren shows up and breaks the Wayfinder. Rey steals Kylo's ship and goes to Ahch-To for some reason, probably just so Luke could show up and give her another lightsaber and nostalgia ship. C-3PO's memory gets restored, so making a big deal of wiping his memory was doubly pointless. Rey finally reaches Palpatine, but the rebel ships have to take down the only Sith communication tower to stop the Star Destroyers. The First Order switches the signal to one of the ships and deactivates the tower, so the rebels have to attack that ship. Rey succeeds, and so do the rebels, and that's basically the plot as far as objectives go. As you can see, it's basically a galactic scavenger hunt, tracking one item or clue after another. But it's not even that. It's just an obstacle being thrown up that the main characters have to get around. Then another. Then another. There are movies like this, but the number of steps, of layers separated from the actual goal, combined with the absurd and made-up nature of each step, really makes me aware how little there actually was in terms of interesting storyline. The good news is that, for the most part, what little storyline there was, I enjoyed. I liked Kylo's redemption arc and his relationship with Rey, and that was most of it. The rise of Skywalker was rampant with fake deaths. Storytellers should know that fake deaths make the audience care about any possible future death less, and when used multiple times, become a cheap trick that gets old fast. But it seems people involved in movies and TV shows don't know this and think you'll fear for Jon Snow's life after he escapes death every other episode for 2 straight seasons. I think you can pull off a good fake death about once per story. For closely related movies like this, I allow 1 per trilogy. They had 5 in one movie. First, there's Palpatine's death that ended up being fake all those years ago. Then Chewbacca fake dies. It would have been much more interesting if Rey had actually killed him and had to live with it. Kylo Ren fake dies twice. Rey stabs him and they're trying to lead you to believe that he's about to die, hoping you forgot about the snake she healed. Then Palpatine blasts Kylo down a huge hole. Of course, nobody expected Kylo to be dead then, but him surviving that fall is completely unbelievable, just like him surviving his ship crashing in the desert. With all the new abilities they introduced in this movie, they could have shown Kylo use a force shield to survive that explosion, and that actually could have been cool. Instead, he just walks out of a fiery explosion unscathed. And then finally Rey fake dies, and Kylo brings her back to life. It's too much. You could tell that Carrie Fisher is dead, because it seemed like they used pre-existing footage of lines cut from other movies. Nearly everything she said was kind of vague and unimportant. Though it did leave me with the feeling that in just a couple years, you won't even need humans to be in big budget movies anymore. They'll be able to completely populate movies with dead stars of the past. And Leia's death was wonky. They missed the moment to kill her off, which would have been when she got blasted out a window into space in The Last Jedi. And she dies because she strained herself, telepathically reaching across the galaxy, I guess? Neatly explained by Maz Kanata. A truly useless character. But the thing I don't really get is why saying Ben's name would make him renounce the dark side, or why she felt it was important to do. Did she want to distract him so Rey could kill him? If so, that's a bit evil of her, and also Rey fucked up that plan by bringing him back to life. Or did she just want to try to turn him from the dark side one last time? Presumably, she's tried to speak sense to him before, and if not, if he really just needed his mother to reach out to him, why didn't she do it until now? But then, of course, he gets stabbed and healed by Rey, which surely make him rethink a few things, and then he sees his dad. After these three things happen, then he gives up the dark side. But was the Leia part really necessary? Did she know that would happen? The writers wanted to kill her off, certainly, but did they need to? And does everybody's corpse disappear now? If you'll recall A New Hope, Obi-Wan Kenobi gathers his chi and dissipates into a Force ghost. This really perplexes Darth Vader. So we can assume he'd never seen that happen before, and he grew up among Jedi. I imagine if Jedi Masters were disappearing back in the glory days, leaving piles of clothes behind, that Anakin would have heard about it. Then Luke also disappears at the end of The Last Jedi. Whether that's completely a decision, or because he seems to have spent himself like Leia seems to have done, is unclear. Either way, Luke is a very powerful Jedi Master, and he was conscious when he dissipated. But now in this movie, both Leia and Kylo Ren do it, and after they die, as if it's just a thing that happens to anybody who's Force sensitive these days. They tried so hard to make this movie funny. They threw in so many extra jokes, almost as if they knew that not everyone would land, but surely a percentage of them would, which would then make the movie funny. And they were right, some of the jokes did land. There were a few moments when I laughed. The guy who said, "This is terrific," when Leia told him to be optimistic, that guy is great. But for every time I laughed, there were 20 jokes that I didn't laugh at. Is Star Wars supposed to be a comedy? Did the original trilogies, or even the prequels, have so many tacked on jokes? Every failed attempt at humor only drags this thing down further. Why put them in? All this goes to show that the writers gave as much thought to this movie as I gave to my high school English papers, which is to say, about 15 minutes worth. A few more things before I end this video. Who's this General Pride guy? It didn't really matter who he was, until he said something to Palpatine to make it seem like he'd been around the whole time. Yet another clumsy attempt at making the plot seem like it was the result of years of planning. The music, as always, was great. John Williams knows how to do it. The blockbuster movie world will be even worse off than it is now when he dies. However, I feel like using the classic Star Wars music in these newer movies is a type of cheating, of milking you for your nostalgia without earning it. A soulless juggernaut coasting on the reputation of its victim. The music made me feel emotions, despite myself. The few glimmers of the inner workings of the Star Wars universe I find fascinating and promising, but they don't last long because the writers evidently don't realize the potential of the subject matter they're working with. Like when we learn about the nature of the universe, of the Force, and of the mystical teachings of the Jedi. There's something about it that when translated into non-mystical, non-sci-fi fantasy lingo, seems true. These are always good moments in the Star Wars movies, and there usually aren't enough of them. Despite all these issues and my nitpicking, I think the movie was actually half decent. After the first 20 minutes left me in complete disgust and disbelief, that feeling slowly faded throughout the movie because of the theme, music, and overall tone. Yes, it was forced, didn't make any sense, and required an extra dose of suspension of disbelief all around, but by the end, I felt myself enjoying it nonetheless. My expectations were certainly quite low, and they didn't do worse than I would have expected. It's a long, drawn-out process of them violently coercing you to turn your brain off, but once you do, watching the overdue and fumbling suicide of a once great beast is, on the whole, not traumatizing, and, at moments, even enjoyable.